Hello, hello, and welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast, where it's not about getting the gig, it's about enjoying the gig. I'm your host, Tanner Guss, and this week I'm joined by Roxy Coss. Roxy is a wonderful saxophonist, composer, bandleader, educator, and activist, and an awesome person. We met recently at the Jazz Education Network conference down here in New Orleans, and we had a chance to talk and got to hear her play. We got some beignets, and it's so exciting to get to share her thoughts with you today. Before we do that, I want to say thank you to everyone who's listening and supporting the show. Thanks for being happy musicians. Thanks for telling your friends about it, using the hashtag Happy Musician, following us on social media. Especially want to say thank you to those who are leaving reviews and ratings on Apple Podcasts, like this one from Flams Forever. It says, "This podcast is perfect for musicians who are trying to figure out their next steps. So many inspirational words from experts from different areas of the field," with an emoji smiley face. Thank you so much for the review, Flams Forever. Reviews are honestly the best way to help us grow the podcast and reach more people. It's super quick and easy to do, and you could get your review featured on the next episode. I also want to say thank you real quick to my buddy Pascal Paul. I totally messed up the audio for my voice on this podcast, and I was worried that I wouldn't be able to use it, and I sent it to him, and he had it back to me within a half an hour, and it sounds great. And if you need a producer or any audio work out there, hit him up. I'll have a link to his social media handles at the website page for this at thehappymusicians.com, so check that out. Okay, back to our interview with Roxy Coss. There's, I think, three big areas that we hit. The first one talks about all these different hats that she wears and what her career looks like. And if you're someone who has a lot of different interests and wants to know what a career doing so many different things might look like, I think this will be really helpful for you. We also spend quite a bit of time on the work she's doing as an activist with her organization, the Women in Jazz organization. So we talk about the mission behind WeJo and the things and services that they offer and the different ways that Roxy thinks we can improve the situation for women and non-binary individuals in the music community. And then we also just talk about her thoughts about happiness, what that means to her, what it looks like in her life, and actions she takes to improve her overall happiness. This is a great episode. I learned a ton. After the interview's over, I'll do a little bit of a debriefing and share some of my thoughts and things that I took away. But for now, I just want to say thank you for taking the time and energy to listen to this. I hope you get something out of it, and please help me welcome Roxy Coss. Roxy Coss, welcome to the Happy Musicians Podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Yeah. I wanted to jump in. Well, first I'll say that your website is the most organized and up-to-date of anyone I've had on the show, which made my life so much easier.
Thank you.
And you recently posted on there your 2019 in review, which was wild. If people listening haven't seen that, you released a new album, Quintet, in August, which is awesome. You've been working on your Emerging Artist Project grant. You did 3 release shows and a Pacific Northwest tour. You were featured in Vanity Fair and New York Times, on the Best of 2019 and Rising Star for Downbeat, Artist to Watch in 2019 on Jazz's. You did over 20 school clinician guest experiences. You were on the board of directors for Gen, teaching at Juilliard, the new school, bandleader for Jazz at Lincoln Center, performing program, and you have your Women in Jazz organization. That is just, and on top of that, dozens of performances with various awesome people. And that is a lot. And my first question would be, like, how do you manage all those different hats? Like, how do you deal with the stress of being in so many different situations and keeping up with a jam-packed schedule?
Well, to be frank, because I think it's important to address this in our culture, it's not possible.
Okay, that was my hope.
Yeah, it's really not possible. It's not sustainable, I should say. It is possible. But, there's only so many hours in a day. This was, I think, without a question, my busiest year yet. And when fall rolled around, well, I would say, the school year, so 2018, 2019 was my busiest yet. And when I got to the beginning of the new school year in the fall of 2019, I made a very concerted effort to start reevaluating which, activities I can really feasibly manage to put 100% into at the same time. I think for most of my career and probably life, I was in a position where I didn't have enough opportunity coming my way. And so I was always seeking out opportunities and, trying to add more things on, and just saying yes to everything. And anything that came my way, I would say yes to, but I was also trying actively to just explore different options, because I think as a musician, as a freelancer, and as a, running your own business type of thing, you never know where something can lead. And so that was sort of my mentality for so many years, that I didn't notice when things started to shift in terms of like having the need to do that anymore. At a certain point, people start coming to you, seeking you out. And I just kept saying yes to everything, which was great, because I think everything that you mentioned, I'm just like super excited to have done and experienced. I think that everything I've done has been important to my personal growth, my musical growth, and my growth in my career. So I definitely don't have any regrets, but it's definitely not sustainable to be kind of firing on all cylinders in every direction. So, I do think, and maybe we'll get into this a little bit more later, but there's sort of like this idea like, oh, I'm making the wrong decision, because once you start getting busier, you have to make tough decisions about, well, I can do this, but I can't do that, just based on dates or whatever, availability. This fear that you might make the wrong decision. And I just don't think that's ever possible, because I think that whatever decisions you make, that's your path. And most of what we do, almost every single thing we do, is helping us along our path. And that's what makes us unique. Each of us chooses different things. So definitely no regrets, but it is a workload that is not sustainable for me personally. So I've been kind of paring things down and making some tough decisions and trying to focus back and say, okay, what's the big picture here? And with that in mind, that makes the decision-making process a little bit easier.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I definitely like to return to what you just said about the fear of missing out on because of making the wrong decision. But before we do that, just maybe getting a bigger idea of your workload. Part of the message that I try to get across on the show is knowing what you want. And part of that is having a realistic expectation of what that will look like if you want to be at the top tier in the music world. And do you think that the workload that you've been working with, although you're wanting to pare down, is that similar to a lot of musicians on your level, the people in your circles? Are they also on that kind of a hustle? And is that something that people should just expect if they're wanting to be at a point in their career that you're at?
I would say yes and no. I think you had so many great questions in there, so I'll try to answer, but if I leave something out, please feel free to reiterate, because I think there are so many great things that you just said that I want to touch on. Again, everybody's path is different, especially in this field. There's no set sort of like pattern that you can follow, especially in this time. I think I entered the industry in 2008 from college, and that's right when we had that big, crash in the market in general. And what that did was it accelerated the process of what had already begun with digitizing music and kind of taking money away from artists from recording stuff. And then the gig industry dried up. So many musicians who had been making a great living for years and years also experienced a drought of performance income but I was just entering. So I didn't even have a chance to see that that was what was normal before I got there. So I kind of, I got to the New York scene with nothing going on. And so for me, it was just sort of normal to like make your own thing happen. Because there was nothing to follow. There was no path where it's like, oh, if you do this, you can get these gigs, or if you do this, you can do that. I just kind of was like, well, I guess that it's completely open-ended. And I think that made it a little bit more challenging for me and for a lot of my peers. But at the same time, I'm actually kind of grateful, because I think it forced me to, and I still have to continue to reevaluate what I want to do. And in any arts field, but in any freelance field in general, which has become more of the economy, I think you should be asking yourself that constantly. What do I want to be doing? And really with any job, although with jobs, there's more of like a formal job description that you agree to fulfill. But for me, it's like, what is the end goal? What does that look like for me? And I have pretty clear visions about what I want that to be for myself. And I took a lot of time when I first graduated college to figure that out. And every couple of years, I kind of reevaluate that. But I checked out this book called The Artist's Way, which I think I would definitely recommend to anyone who feels like they're not really sure if they're on the right path, or if the work they're doing is sort of smart work or going towards their ultimate goals. It helped me focus in on what the main reasons for me choosing music and for what my goals in music are, which is really to be touring, recording, and performing with my band and my compositions, kind of being a band leader and getting my voice out there artistically is kind of the top goal. And along the way, I found that I really love other things too, like teaching and kind of inspiring younger people to follow their dreams. So that could look like teaching in a traditional sense. It could look like doing panel discussions. And it's involved with a lot of the work I do for WeJo, Women in Jazz organization. And then, of course, starting that organization, that's become a huge priority to me as well, which is I don't feel, again, that it's a departure from my initial path, because when I started doing that type of work, it was like, this has been a part of my life, and it's been draining my energy for my entire musical journey. So putting that energy into something that's actually constructive is actually easier than just having this burden that you deal with every day in a sort of amorphous way. It's like, now I can actually address this and feel like I'm contributing to change and doing something about it. So those are kind of two of the priorities. And like all of the side musician work I do, I love, and I try to continue to focus that too, because that's another area where I would love to be able to say yes to everything, but you start to realize that if you say yes to everything, you don't really have time for yourself. When I take tons of gigs, I don't have time to sit down and compose or whatever else, tends to get, for me, deprioritized. It's easier for me to focus on others than myself. So the first thing to go is going to be my practice, my composition, and those are essentially the most important things for me in terms of being a strong artist. So it's definitely very tricky to find a balance, especially when you do things like, for instance, having a job at Juilliard. It's like, that's a real job. So it's very easy for me to meet those requirements because somebody else is holding you accountable. It's like, if I don't show up to class, that's really bad. But if I don't show up for myself, the consequences are just for me. Nobody else is going to be like, what happened to you?
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So I also had a lot of thoughts come up, and maybe the first one was, in this process of reevaluating what it is that you want in your career and getting your priorities straight, is that do you have a specific way you go about doing that? And do you do it on some kind of schedule, like yearly or something? Or do you not have a set structure for how you do that evaluation?
I think that naturally I kind of do it on a kind of I don't want to say superficial, but like a level that's not super intense when the new year rolls around, just because everybody talks about New Year's resolutions. So it reminds me to kind of sit down and look at, you know, are there things that I feel lacking? Like, do I feel happy? Just checking in general terms.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes around January, I'll just like make a list. And I'm a list maker, so for me, that's not a huge deal, but just kind of lists of different areas of my life. And so, for instance, I might have like, you know, music in terms of like very specific music, like practice, composition, listening, or then that's much different than like, okay, performance-wise, am I doing the types of performances I want to do? And then I'll have like, okay, personal relationships or finances, or, you know, there's these topics of your life. And then within those, it's like, how do I feel? What do I want more of? What do I want less of? And what are the actionable steps that I think will help me get closer to feeling satisfied in those areas of my life? And I think that process came from just realizing that I didn't feel balanced. And I still struggle with that, you know, when I'm doing something, I'm doing it 100%. So I'm putting 100% of myself into something, and then something else suffers. So trying to keep reminding myself, like, all of these things are important to me feeling satisfied and happy in my life. And I need, the biggest thing is not each individual element. It's the fact that each part is focused on at some point throughout the day or throughout the week.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I know some people are maybe anti-list or setting particular goals for whatever reason, but it sounds like you're very pro-goal-oriented growth.
Yeah, and I think you have to be careful to fall into the trap of the goals being so specific, because, for instance, if your goal is to win a competition and you don't, then you put your whole value into winning that competition. So as I've gotten older, I've tried to make my goals more about, like I said, more about satisfaction and overall feeling of happiness and wellness and balance. And then the actionable steps, I try to view them as towards the ultimate goal. So, okay, maybe I want to have, like, this is not a real example from my life, but like in terms of a competition, just reframing that type of activity as, okay, I want a record contract. So in order, and I want that because I want my music to be heard by more people. And then winning the competition is just one avenue towards getting the record contract to have people hear your music. That way, if it doesn't happen, you have other avenues you can pursue and you don't feel like you failed, because that's not your goal to win the competition. That was just one step you can try to take.
Yeah. Okay, I like that a lot. That does, I think, happen more often than not, that a step on the way to your real end goal you get fixated on as if it's the actual end goal.
Absolutely. And then, you know, on the contrary, like if you do win the competition, sometimes there's the trap of falling into thinking you've made it, and then you lose sight of that bigger goal, which is like, I just want more people to hear my music. So I shouldn't be like congratulating myself just because I won some competition.
One thing that I think feeds into all of this and that you've talked about on your blog is this idea of growth, and specifically how you feel like there are certain times that come in waves where you're just really in the groove, everything's flowing right, you're able to play and compose how you want to, and then there are times where that's not there, and how you seem to have found a way to access that more readily. And maybe you could share, I think specifically you talked about like just a thirst for knowledge and about growing in different ways and fostering creativity.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I think yes to all of the above. It definitely still comes in waves. I've definitely gotten better at not being a victim of the wave, kind of like riding it more. I think it's part of the same thing with finding balance and just knowing yourself. Over the years, I realized, okay, I do have these waves. So if I feel down, if I feel slow, it's okay because I know that's not going to last forever. You know, when I was younger, I would get really fearful in those moments because I thought, oh my gosh, if I stay like this, my life will be a ruin, you know. But now I realize, like, oh, this is just temporary. And by the same token, as I get, you know, overworked and busy sometimes in a way that I wasn't before, just knowing that that's not going to last forever either. And I can just make it through this little stretch and things will change again. So kind of having more patience with yourself and trust in that wave, in that process, in the ups and downs. And again, just making sure you recheck in with yourself regularly to make sure that you feel satisfied, because that's the part that, you know, yeah, I kind of built this trust that things come up and down. And then I realized halfway through the year, like, this wave isn't going back down. So I'm going to have to actually make some changes so that it does, because otherwise I will burn out. Because externally, opportunities have changed for me, and things have changed in a way that the tide that I got used to riding is no longer there. So one example I have is, like, last year I was doing so much teaching and so much traveling and performing that I really hadn't composed anything in like a year and a half, which for me is very sad.
Mm-hmm.
So I blocked out 2 weeks this summer where that was my top priority. And I tried really hard not to actually take any commitments, because I felt like it had gone too far where this is the first thing to go. So it just kind of resets your priorities, resets your brain. And then the hope is that you can take that forward with you throughout the rest of the year and make a little bit more time for it in your life. But yeah, kind of going extreme in the other way to get that balance. So that's part of the waves too, which is like knowing that sometimes I'm going to have days or weeks where all I do is practice. And then there's going to be some days or weeks where I just don't practice. And for me, that's okay. And everybody's different. You know, like if I played the trumpet, that would not be okay. But for me, I've just tried to be patient with that and be like, this is actually what works for me. And even though some people might say that that's not correct or that's not good enough or whatever, for me, I know it is, because I know I'm getting better at music still. And again, that's the end goal.
Yeah, that's fantastic. One last thing I wanted to ask before moving on some other topics was, with your workload, do you have people that you've hired to help you manage all of these things?
Yes. And that's new. I've been doing everything myself for a very long time up until very recently. And this year, I guess it started last year when I started working on Outside in Music, label run by my friend Nick Sinzer. Mm-hmm. We started talking about some of my goals and how to reach that. And so I was saying to Nick, I need help. I'm doing all of this and I can't do it, but I also can't stop doing it because this is helping me get towards my goals. So I brought on somebody who's been assisting with a lot of different things, from the website design to booking emails to my newsletter to planning logistics when I do performances and clinics, getting the contract right, getting the technical requirements out there, all of this type of work, which is computer work that has really become, if I'm not careful, the thing I spend my entire days doing. So I've had help with that. And then I also, on several of my albums, but on this one in particular, hired publicists and radio promoters separately from the label efforts as well. And then I have somebody from Nick's team also doing social media work for me, posting and managing all of that kind of thing. So it's been a transition because in this industry, I think most people still want to talk to the artist one-on-one anyway, directly. So that makes it a little bit difficult because you're really like your own manager, your own booker, and then you're trying to like be an artist, and it's just a lot of work. Obviously, I think almost everybody can identify with that feeling. So my goal is to kind of go in a path that I think probably existed a lot more in past eras, and for more established artists on the scene, which is having somebody do those jobs and just feeling comfortable saying you're really going to have to talk to my assistant or my manager or my booker because I just don't have time. And if I do that work, the art will suffer and you're not going to want to hire me anyway.
Yeah. Well, and so like up until a year ago, you were still doing all of that on your own.
Yes.
Wow. Okay. Well, that's really interesting to me because I was curious at what point you started to hand off some of that. And was the reasoning behind that because you weren't in a place where you were ready to have these people involved, or was it just that you were comfortable knowing that it was going to get done the way that you wanted doing it or wanted it to get done?
Definitely the first thing you said. I just need it, and I know that I couldn't feasibly keep doing what I was doing. Something would suffer. And I think what you bring up is super important because it's been hard for me to let go of things, being that I've always done everything myself. I know how I want it done. So I've definitely worked with a few different people to try to find the right fit and just kind of work on my skills of delegating and communication and also just letting go and saying, hey, like, here's something that it matters how it's done, but here's something that it really doesn't matter how it's done. It just needs to get done.
I like it. Well, okay, that's all great. Why don't we move on? Can you tell us about Wejo, what it is, and what it is you guys are working to change in the music world?
Yes. So Wejo, Women in Jazz Organization, is a collective of almost 500 members, and members are all professional jazz musicians and people who identify as being a woman or a non-binary person. And Wejo started in July 2017. Aubrey Johnson and I, she's a friend of mine and a vocalist. We've been talking about some issues centered around women in jazz and being a woman in New York and feminist stuff and kind of reading books and stuff like that. And there were a couple different groups around the city of small groups of women just getting together and talking about stuff. And I just felt the need for women in my life more and for these discussions to happen more. So we hosted a meeting at the union, and the first meeting was 12 women, and then the second meeting was 24 women. And I realized right away, this is not something that's just going to be a friend circle. It's something that I think we really all need. And we need to build this community of women in jazz. We need to be able to support each other and to share stories and hire each other and know who each other are. We're often isolated and pitted against each other. So really trying to build the community and then empowering and educating ourselves. So like having a space where the individual can feel empowered. It's so common that women in jazz just quit at some point. The older you get, you see less and less women doing it. And then just being frustrated with the day-to-day stuff in the profession, like wanting to have a venue where, strength in numbers, we can actually start to hopefully tackle some of these issues and change what the scene looks like and how it feels to be a part of it. So those are kind of our three focuses of the organization. The mission is to help level the playing field in jazz so that women and non-binary people can contribute, have the opportunity to contribute, and make the art form a more rich and diverse and successful art form and music. So we are we had monthly meetings for a very long time, which was awesome, and we've done some hangs that are more informal. We had a reading group. We've thrown some concerts, some jam sessions. We have a mentorship program, which is pairing members with college level musicians throughout the country. And this year we have, I think, 32 matches. So 32 college students have a professional mentor in jazz that they're working with. And we've done radio shows. We host a monthly radio show at WKCR in New York City, featuring all music from our members. And we're doing some playlists, curating, and just trying to get the music out there. But we have very lofty goals. We have a lot of ideas for just kind of trying to unify this idea of women in jazz. And there's all these little pockets and organizations around the country and around the world working on this issue. And I think it's really important to come together and support each other because we're all kind of doing this work simultaneously. And it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of time. So to all be kind of doing the same work, it helps to have support, but also just share those resources and not have to like reinvent the wheel everywhere. So right now we're working on getting our nonprofit status, which will hopefully enable us to fund some of these programs that we've already been doing and that we really want to get on the ground running with. So.
Yeah. Okay, that's awesome. So my next question would be, how can people best get involved in it? The ideal way would be to sign up as a member, right?
Yes, exactly. That's the first thing. On our website, which is wearewejo.org, there is a member tab, and there's a link to an application form, and it's super easy. All we want to make sure that members are all professional musicians, so they're not like still full-time students. And then we want to make sure that they identify as women or non-binary people. Those are the main, sort of requirements. And then the other stuff is just to sort of make sure that that's all in line. The idea behind membership is that it's 100% inclusive of anyone who feels that they fit within that sort of category. And that was kind of the impetus for it in the first place. Was like, this can't be about a clique or, having some sort of level of recognition or skill level or anything like that. It needs to be something where we're all in this together and representing everything that it means to be a woman in jazz.
And so, maybe as someone who's a student hasn't yet gone out and thrown themselves into the professional world, are there resources on there for them?
Yeah, and we're building that, but obviously the first thing that a student could be involved with is the mentorship program if they're at the collegiate level. So looking towards, we are going to be putting information about the new season up shortly. I think applications open in March, so definitely stay tuned for that. And we are working towards, like, in the long-term future, kind of working down towards high school and middle school and even elementary school in terms of how can we reach these young girls early, because we all know that it starts very young, and kind of make an impact in the younger arenas. We've had ideas to do kind of similar to the Jazz Organ Center program, where you're educating, but you're also performing the things that are more centered towards women in jazz or towards, empowering female students at a young age. So we have a lot of ideas around that. And then for the older people who may not identify in those categories, you can, of course, donate towards these initiatives. And then one thing that is definitely a priority for moving forward is going to be a way to involve men in an active position. It probably will not be as a member, but in terms of events, one of the core things about the organization initially was these conversations, and we want to open those conversations up to include men, both to have them be able to help and lead this cause, but also to help educate and, dare I say, improve the culture.
Yeah. And I guess, at least in my mind, when we have these conversations about the state of women in jazz, and it seems like most of the actionable advice should be focused at what men can do to change how they're acting and how they're receiving the women in the field, and how we can be more inclusive. And maybe we could get into advice that the organization shares and ideas that you have on how we can do that.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a great question, and one that I hear consistently. The tricky part of answering it is that there's no right answer and there's no wrong answer. My personal philosophy is that we need to, like most things we've been talking about today, zoom out and look at the big picture. The goal is not to have certain men who may have made certain women feel uncomfortable leave the community. That's not the goal. The goal is to have a healthy community. The goal is to have a thriving community. And the goal is to have a balanced and representative community. So I think just shifting this tone a little bit, I think that we've come to this point where a lot of men either feel like lost, like I don't know how to help, or they feel defensive and like maybe there's a lack of understanding of why this is important, or they feel like why can't we just focus on the music, or they might feel like afraid that something they're going to do or say is going to be turned against them. So I just want to like throw all of that in the trash and say, let's refocus this tone. We should all see that we have a lot of area to grow in this music, that we need more audiences. We need more musicians dedicating their life to this. We need more people joining the industry to promote our efforts and really grow this part of music, because it's important. It's America's art form. It's something where individuals are celebrated. It's real art. It's not made from a machine. And I think we need it more than ever in this type of world that we're living in. And if we can all kind of agree on these like big issues, these big goals, and have like a common thing we're working towards, this again just becomes one of the ways that we help work on that overall issue, which is, of course, we're going to have bigger audiences if we have more diverse artists, and that includes women. You know, if you want to build your female audience fan base, you should probably have a woman in your band. It's just sort of like things that we can start to be more logical about. And I think that on an everyday basis, yeah, it's like, can I hire a woman for this? Like, am I considering hiring a woman for this? If not, why not? Do I think that there aren't any capable candidates? If so, let me ask around. Because again, I think one of the biggest issues is just not knowing who those women in jazz are. You know, over the history of the music, there have always been women doing this at a high level who haven't gotten the due that they deserve. And Mary Lou Williams is the biggest example of this and the most obvious. So I just use her because it's undeniable. But there are hundreds and thousands of more women who this happened to throughout their career. And after a while, if you're not getting called to do gigs, you're not performing and you're not practicing. So then, of course, you're not going to be as good as your male counterpart because you haven't had the same opportunities and experiences that he's had. So at every level, just asking, does my band / label / whatever you work in look like the general population of America? And if not, we have work to do. The other thing I think that's important to do and start doing and continue doing is just talking about it. And that's not an answer that anyone likes to hear because they want to have a solution and do something. But it's just important because as soon as we stop talking about it, we stop making progress. We stop realizing it's still an issue. It's still a huge issue, and we need to talk about it all the time. And we need to talk about what those issues look like because that's going to point us towards solutions naturally. If you don't understand the problem, which for men, if you don't understand what it's like to be a woman in jazz, like you're not really going to understand it because you're not that person. Then we need to be talking about what does that experience feel like? What does it look like? And what am I doing to either help or hurt the situation? Because we're all active participants, whether we know it, whether we see it, or whether we choose it or let it choose to run how we run things. Ignorance is not an excuse at this point. We just have to be talking about it and be evaluating our own blindness, our own privilege, something that's been definitely important to me in this process, which is like, okay, as a white woman, what is my privilege? As a person who could afford private lessons growing up, what is my privilege, etc. There's just so many ways that we all have different things that help us or hurt us, and we need to look at how that plays into our decision making and the way that we act towards others.
Wow. Okay, that was awesome. I totally that was very great information, especially just that talking about it can be so powerful even if you aren't actively trying to like implement some organization to solve the problem. Just the fact that there are plenty of us men who, because we aren't experiencing the problems that you guys have to face, we aren't thinking about it all the time, as you talked about how it's something that you just live with, and that having that conversation is maybe one of the most impactful ways to just have everyone less ignorant, hopefully, and aware of what's going on.
Totally. And you'll notice, like, I think for any listeners who maybe haven't really thought about this too much, I think that if you just start trying to ask more questions, you'll notice right away that your awareness goes way up, and you'll start to see things in a new way. You'll start to see little things happening that maybe you had no idea were happening constantly for others. So, yeah.
So as far as asking question goes, are there certain questions that in your mind you're like, why aren't men asking these questions? Like, what would those maybe the most helpful questions for men to be asking be?
Well, I think, like I said before, the first one would be like, am I hiring women? And if not, why? And I think then talking to others about that. So saying, like, let's say that you're a dude and you have a band and you don't really hire women usually for your band. And you think, well, I don't really know anyone who, like, can play in this level and also is cool to hang out with. I just don't have those people in my circle. Then I would say, okay, that's fine. Nobody faults you for that. However, if you are complacent in it, then you start to become responsible for that. So let's say you went to music school and there's only one girl in your program, because that's kind of where we're at right now. You may just not know girls who play or women who play. So I would say take it upon yourself to do something about that. And I can't answer what that would look like because we're all in very different situations around the country. But I'm guessing there is a solution to at least start that process of meeting new people, finding circles, even reaching out to Wejo or whoever in your community to be very plugged in and involved with women in jazz and say, hey, I need a pianist for this gig or something like that. Who do you recommend? And even if it doesn't work out that one time, you're starting to change the process of hiring musicians. And I think this is extremely important for education. It's one thing for performance, but for education, you have thousands, I'm guessing, if not hundreds, of women who are overqualified, completely qualified to be teaching jazz to students and teaching these concepts. And it's extremely important for students to see themselves in their teachers and role models and mentors. So if you have a jazz festival in your community, or you have a program, a high school jazz program where you bring in artists to work with your students and you've never brought a woman in, or you've brought one woman out of 5 per season for 10 years, I think the question you need to ask is, who can I bring in? I need to level this playing field, because there's no reason that in those particular situations, women can't be a part of that. There's just no argument that I've heard that has swayed me otherwise so far. That's my opinion. So that I just want to reiterate that that's, to me, still the biggest question you can be asking is, why am I not hiring women? And then the other question that I think is equally important is just to be asking women in your life what their experience is. Kind of providing a space for women in your life. Oftentimes the conversation is about men or men's feelings. Even when we started Wejo, oftentimes I get this feedback of, well, why don't you include men? And my answer is, until women have a space where it's just about them on an everyday basis, we can't make it about men. Everything's about men already. So yes, of course, the end goal is that it's balanced and we're equally addressing men and women, and we equally see them represented in the industry. But until that's the case, we still need bands of all women, or groups of all women, or organizations of all women. Because if you look at, for instance, like open a jazz publication, and it's getting better, but oftentimes if I open like a program season guide for a major jazz club in New York, it'll be all men the entire month. And so it's like, nobody's saying, oh, why do you have men in jazz featured? Like, so until like it's questionable to have all men, I don't think we should be questioning things that are all women. So what that means for individuals is just making space for women in your life. And it could be as small as just, asking a female friend, do you experience discrimination? Do you experience harassment? Do you feel like you've had limited opportunities? I don't know. There's a million questions to ask, but just making that space for women to actually guide that conversation and not feeling like you have the answer. You're not making the space to give them advice. You're making the space to start to understand and to listen.
Another question I had was, and I think you have a valuable perspective on this, being involved or having gone through music school and now teaching at several universities, and as one of the few, if not the only, as you said, women studying in the college program, how, if you as a student are experiencing sexual misconduct or harassment on some level, or being treated unfairly based solely on gender, what actions do you think they should take to address this, whether it be from a student or from professors?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's important to understand that everybody's different, and I don't have the answer to that. I think the most important thing is knowing that, like, you as that individual, whether you're a young woman or non-binary person or a trans person or whatever, sort of quote minority person you are in that situation, that your happiness and your comfort comes first. So the solution for you might be different for somebody else, and that's okay, that you don't want to add judgment to yourself on top of feeling harassed or abused. For me personally, I had a few instances growing up in different stages of my education where I actually reported the person to the administration. And I will say that, both times that this happened, I was not thrilled with the outcome of that report and the reporting process. It was, to say the least, handled in a interesting way. I think that on those terms, things have gotten better because there's so much attention on this issue right now that if you are an organization or an institution, like, you're being held more responsible to a higher standard of professionalism in this regard. And so I think that that's a great example of why I would encourage young women to report instances, because, look, I went through it, and it wasn't the worst possible outcome of a reporting incident, but it wasn't great. And what I realized as I get older is that the fear of reporting, there's real fears behind this. This is a very small industry. It's a very small world. You know everybody. By the time you're my age, you've heard of almost everybody involved in this community, and if not, met them and worked with them. And there's people who I continue to have to see and work with in my career that have maybe acted inappropriately towards me. And so there is definitely a fear that there's going to be retribution, that you're going to have a reputation, that you're not going to get hired. And those fears are real. This has happened to women my age. This is not something that is unfounded. However, you realize as you get older, those people are not people you want to play with anyway. They're not people you want to be hanging out with anyway. And the truth ultimately comes out. And that includes the truth of your character. And so if you just stay true to yourself, you don't have to fear necessarily reporting something, because ultimately, if you're a good person and you're a good musician and you do your job, that will speak for itself eventually. Now, that doesn't mean it won't be hard for you in the meantime, but there are way more avenues that you can pursue of support in this day and age. Just sometimes having somebody to talk to that has gone through the same thing can help a lot. So definitely reach out, utilize your resources. If you're in a college, inevitably you're going to have a wellness program associated with the college or the university. Please seek that out. I certainly did. I took advantage of the free counseling throughout college, and seek out other women in jazz, because I guarantee they're going to have gone through something similar. And just having that moral support is so important, to know that you're not alone, and that you're not crazy. This is not just you. This is a bigger systemic problem. And if you feel enough courage to step forward and report this, that you are helping somebody else who might suffer from the same problem. And I guarantee you, if you experience something, you are not the only one. It might be that person's first offense, but it's a pattern of power abuse. It's not about sex. It's not about attraction. It's not about a relationship. And in this case, obviously, I'm talking about more serious offenses, but it could also be just inappropriate comments used under the guise of humor. And I guarantee you this behavior is a pattern. And so if speaking with the person about it and trying to address them directly is not an option, or hasn't succeeded in changing the behavior, it's not your job to make them feel comfortable. It's not your job to educate them. We often put the responsibility and the burden of change on the oppressed, on the victim, and that's not your job. So do what makes you feel good. Take care of yourself in whatever way makes you feel comfortable. Yeah.
Great. Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much. I was going to move on to a different question, but if you think there's parts of this greater topic with the work that Ouija's doing that you'd like to share before I do that, you're welcome to.
I think I just want to say that as a society, we, in a broad sense, kind of understand this idea that people who have faced trauma carry that with them in their life. And, you know, almost everybody in the world has faced some sort of trauma, whether it's losing somebody close to them or physical violence or, you know, some type of, you know, car accident or on and on. There's so many ways that we could experience trauma. But I think one thing that's important for people to understand in jazz is that almost every woman in jazz has experienced trauma associated with her profession. And that's really hard because it makes the thing that you're supposed to love and enjoy have this baggage. And so if you see a woman struggling with, you know, not wanting to practice or not wanting to go to a jam session or not wanting to put herself out there in a multitude of ways, again, here's an opportunity to ask a question and say, hey, you seem like you're struggling, because in my experience, a lot of the time there's a lot behind that. And that was definitely my experience, which was like, once you've experienced trauma repeatedly and it's related to music, it makes it hard to feel joyful about music and want to work on it and feel good about it and feel like if you have an opportunity that it's actually a positive thing, because you're putting yourself out there, and putting yourself out there makes you vulnerable to risk. And that's true for anybody, man or woman. But with women in jazz, there's an extra risk that, okay, if I play with this new band, is there going to be someone on the bandstand who touches me inappropriately on the bandstand or makes a comment or belittles me? There's all these questions that go into it, that you are preparing for battle every time you go on the stage. And it's just, it permeates like your whole involvement with music, unless you've been lucky enough to not experience those things, which I do want to say at this point in the conversation, I have so much hope working with young people around the country, working with my students at Juilliard. I have seen a shift from when I was that age, and I'm very hopeful and very happy about the students engage in conversation about these issues, how they ask me questions, how they show respect for me as a woman, as their teacher, things that I did not see from my peers at that stage. So I am very hopeful. And I say all of this from the perspective of somebody who is, you know, mid-30s, and realizing that a young woman may not have these same experiences, but that it is likely that this is still permeating the culture in some, you know, some regard.
Yeah. Well, thank you for sharing that. I had just one more question for you, actually. And on your 2016 release, Restless Idealism, you have a tune called Happiness is a Choice. And I was hoping you could explain that, maybe the message behind the song and what that phrase means to you.
Yeah, definitely. It's funny because since I've written that, I've changed my mind so many times about whether that statement is true or false. When I wrote that, I was realizing that I had been depressed my entire life, as far back as I could remember. And it was mostly a mild depression. Sometimes it got a little worse. In college, it definitely got worse based on some traumatic events that happened. And because it was normal for me to feel a little bit of depression, I didn't, I think that it had gone into the realm of like a chemical thing where it's really not your fault, which is, this is why I feel like there's so many disclaimers for that title. mental illness is real, and certain people have like actual physical, biological, chemical imbalance for various reasons, that it's not their choice that they are dealing with depression or other mental illness. The title is more about the other part of things, which is sometimes we create cycles for ourselves, and I was certainly doing this, where you get so used to being negative that it becomes impossible to be positive because you've created a habitual cycle for yourself. And once you're caught in the habit, you know, like any habit, it just becomes more and more difficult to break as you reinforce that. So I was in a place where it was like, wow, I could just choose to be happy. Like that's an option. Like I could just say, hey, I could focus on the good things. Like, hey, let me, you know, for lack of a better phrase, count my blessings. You know, what am I grateful for? What do I have going on that's positive? And do I have the power to change my circumstances and create a life that I actually want, that I actually love, and that I see as like success in terms of happiness and fulfillment? So that was around the time I wrote that, was kind of really a big shift in paradigm for me as a person. And I think for me, I'll always struggle with finding that balance. And I think the answer for me is to try to choose happiness instead of choosing to get caught up in drama or dark thoughts or spiraling, which can be easy to do when, you know, your livelihood is not guaranteed, or you have like an irregular schedule, or all the things that come along with being a musician. So for me, it was just kind of a realization and a reaffirming that I'm in control of my life for the most part. Of course, there are things that happen to us, but I ultimately get to choose how to react to that. And it's interesting you bring it up now, because I am reading the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I'm like in chapter 2 of this book, which is obviously a very popular, famous book. And it's talking about this exact idea. So it's been interesting to kind of revisit this however many years later from writing that song, and say, like, this is still something I want to remind myself of and focus my energy on, because I'm ultimately the only person really responsible at the end of the day for how my day went. You know, I can't really blame anything on anyone else. Like, yes, things will happen to me that are out of my control. And it might not be fair. Life is definitely not fair, but that doesn't mean that there's not joy, and that you can't focus on those joyful things and create more space for those joyful things to happen in your life. And just really, what about fun? You know, what about happiness? What about things that bring you joy, spark joy for you?
That's awesome. I love it. I'm totally on board for it. That's all I have. If you'd like to take a minute now, you can let people know where to find you online, what shows you have coming up, anything that you want the listeners to be aware of.
Definitely. I would encourage you to check out my website, roxycoss.com, and got lots of music on all the streaming platforms. And my gigs are all listed on my website. And just check out Quintet, which is the latest record, Roxy Coss Quintet. And sign up for my newsletter, which will keep you posted of all the upcoming performances in your area.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being with us.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I thought about one more thing I wanted to add to a question you asked earlier.
Yeah, for sure.
You were asking about hustling, and do you feel like people should prepare themselves to just work this hard if they are in this industry? And I answered part of that, but I think that question was larger. And I just wanted to circle back a little bit on the idea of what it means to be a musician or any type of artist, and any type of entrepreneur. And I kind of see myself as all three in different, they're very different things. And I think that everybody has a different path. Once again, this theme keeps coming up. And what that means is that not only are you going to want different things, but different things will come easier for different people. And for me, I think that I work about as hard as anyone I know. I think that just in terms of hours of the day, not everybody works this many hours. And it's the part of the reason I do that is it's been a way for me to cope with some of these issues, that it's like, okay, if I'm not happy, I know that if I work, I'll feel like I'm doing something about it, So it's been a coping mechanism for me, really, and a way to make me feel in control of my own life and my own outcomes. I think that women do work harder than men in the same arena to get the same type of recognition. I think that I'm trying to do something that not all musicians are going to want to do. Like I said, there's, to me, 3 very specific things, but it's actually more like 5 or 6. Like if you look at my bio, it's like musician is a whole job in itself. And many of our listeners today might just want to be musicians, and that's great. That is awesome. Many of my heroes were just musicians. If you're just a musician, you're not going to be doing the long list of activities that make up my daily routine, right? But for me, I also wanted to be a composer. That's a whole other job. I also really find joy from being a band leader. That's a whole other job that comes with a lot more business-related tasks. I found myself in this role of being an activist, which has become very central to who I am and important to the work that I do. And on and on and on. And so everything is kind of in service of those big goals. Like being an entrepreneur means like running my own business that allows me to be a band leader and take my thing on the road. It allows me to reach lots of students through clinic work or guest artist work. But all of these are actually different jobs. So not everybody is going to want to do 5 jobs. They might just choose one job. There's room for everybody in this industry, and I say industry, but really in this community. And I would love to see more people see the options there, because I think when you go to music school, it's like you can either be a musician or a teacher, right? Like performance or education. And I hate that dichotomy, because there's so many other things you can do in jazz or in music. Like, we need people writing great reviews of albums. We need people booking acts at venues. We need people opening venues. We need people running festivals. We need people doing podcasts and blogs. We need people curating playlists. There's so many jobs in this field that we need strong, capable people who are, well-versed and educated about the music itself. And teaching and performing don't have to be exclusive paths that you follow, right? Like, I'm doing both of those things. So saying I'm going to be a music teacher is great, but that doesn't mean that's your only option, right? And the amount that you hustle, I think, is just going to be related to, one, how much privilege are you coming from? What luck do you have? But also, how much do you want to be working? I think we can all choose the amount we want to be working. It just is what it takes to get there, because you have to be prepared when opportunity comes to you. And so there's a lot of work that happens before anybody sees anything, right? Somebody might look at that list of things I did last year and be like, wow, an overnight success. And it's all this work that went on for 20 years leading up to that is the stuff that people don't see. So you have to be prepared. And I think if you want a certain thing that is seen as very successful or very well known, you have to understand the preparation that goes into that beforehand, and not just with music, but about being business savvy, putting yourself out there, taking risks, and being creative about ways to get your music heard or to get yourself established in your career.
Yeah, awesome. That's so true. Thanks for sharing. Anything else that came to mind, or you feel good?
I feel good. Do you feel good?
Yeah, I thought that was pretty awesome. All right, that does it for this week's episode of the Happy Musicians Podcast. The featured track you're listening to is off of Roxy's latest release, Quintet. The track is Females Are Strong as Hell, and you can find a link to buy this record and links to everything else that we talked about on the show, all the books and blog posts, websites, and people that we referenced at the website for the podcast, thehappymusicians.com. You can stay up to date on all things Happy Musicians by following us on social media at The Happy Musicians and subscribing to the show. I want to encourage you to share the podcast with your friends, tell your fam, your bandmates about it, share it on social media, and please, if you can, rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts. It's incredibly helpful. Before we're done, I just want to take a minute to share one of my big takeaways from the conversation. So, usually when I'm thinking about the issues in gender in the music community, it's about the things that men are doing that are making women and non-binary individuals uncomfortable. So I've been approaching the topic from the idea of, okay, what advice can we share to men so that we can be more supportive and understanding and inclusive to the rest of the music community? And I think that's important, but this conversation was also helpful to make me realize that I need to be careful not to make it all about men. And I'm definitely gonna take it to heart, this idea of just asking women about their experience without giving advice or feeling the need to solve the problem and save the day. I'm gonna do a lot more listening, and this is definitely going to be a recurring topic on the podcast. So hope you're enjoying it. Let me know what you think. Thanks for being here, and see you next week. Stay happy.